One boba, please.
All right, you can scan the code.
Why?
Because the code takes you to the app.
That's 2 apps today. Yeah. Got apps for everything, you know? Even though I'm already talking to the person that could just take my order right here, but I got to download an app. Sorry, it's not your fault. You know, you didn't create the system. The system is just, it is what it is, and we're both victims here, so.
What?
Welcome back. This is episode 19 of The Lockdown, the Practical Privacy and Security podcast. Now, for those of you in the United States, I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving break. I know I did. And for listeners in other parts of the world, I hope you are feeling rested either way. Now, what do you do when you're in a coffee shop and you go to pay and it asks for your email address or phone number and then asks you to swipe your card? Well, I did an experiment. I created an alias email and used one of my credit cards to make a payment recently. And interestingly enough, in a different merchant, it sent me a receipt to that alias email I'd created, so it had tied it to my credit card number. Now, the reason I bring that up is important. When you're in a coffee shop or any store for that matter, and they ask for a telephone number or email, have no doubt that the system running that behind the scenes is going to be associating that with your card. And those payment processors, whether it's Square or there's other ones out there, will identify you for future purchases. I know many of you out there would not dream of entering your email address when you pay for a coffee, but that's just one aspect of how the system tracks you and keeps tabs on what we're doing, our behaviours, our spending habits, which leads nicely into today's show. I have Luke Mulks from Brave Software. They reached out to me. This is not sponsored. I haven't been paid in any way, but they reached out to me and asked if I could have Luke on the show. And I'm glad I did. As many of you know, I have been using LibreWolf for some time now. And for decades, I've been a Firefox user. And isn't it ironic that when we de-Google our lives, we're actually using Google products? For example, Graphene OS requires the Google Pixel phone, which is obviously a Google device. Now, despite the Google logo appearing when you boot up a Graphene OS device, which is essentially like the BIOS of the phone, it is, for all intents and purposes, completely de-Googled, which I like. But this is where Google do something right. They provide the Android operating system for developers like Graphene OS to build upon. And it's the same with Brave, which is based on the Chromium web browser. But it's not Google Chrome. And in fact, it's vastly different. Now, in my opinion, any browser which requires you to log in with your identity is to be avoided like the plague. And just like how they associate your email in a store, have no doubt they're doing that with all of your online activities as well. In fact, Google Chrome has been caught in the past with the incognito tab not being so incognito. I'll link to that in the show notes. There's a number of issues with Google Chrome, and info stealers is another one. We hear a lot about ransomware these days, where they're targeting anyone from a small business to a giant corporation. But info stealers are on the rise, which is essentially malware designed to look for your Bitwarden or your KeePass password, especially cryptocurrencies as well. If you're logging into those on your machine, they are taking all of that. They want to exfiltrate your crypto. They want your passwords and your accounts because these are quite lucrative to cyber criminals. And this matters because I think the choice of browser determines the risk that you have with info stealers. And also ransomware as well. Quite often it's a phishing link and you might click on something. And to be honest, I want a hardened browser. Now this extends to ads. And you'll hear this during my conversation with Luke. But I've always considered ads as the antichrist or the evil side of the internet. Now sure, it makes web pages look very ugly indeed. But I always assume that one of those ads could have malware in it. Aside from the privacy risks of it tracking you, I don't want an ad to be loading something into a page that could be exploiting a vulnerability in the browser. Which leads us on to Brave. Now, Brave have a privacy-focused web browser. Now, I must admit, since the conversation with Luke, I've been using the Brave browser. In fact, one of the questions I asked him was, if you're moving from another browser and you're using Brave for the first time, tell us about all the things that might scare me away. And I'll give you an example. When I first started using Brave, I thought, okay, what's this? Brave Rewards, Leo AI. And to the privacy-minded among us, we see that as unnecessary. However, Luke has done a great job of explaining all of that and also putting my mind at rest as well. So without further ado, here is Luke Mulks from Brave Software. Luke, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'll do a brief intro, but then hand over to you because I'm not going to be able to do this justice. I know you have 20 years in the industry and you are the VP of Business Operations at Brave. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's the right title. Yeah, and at this point, there's a lot to it. We kind of main thing I do at Brave here is how much do you want me to get into it at this point?
As much as you like. Yeah, I've got a bit of a write-up here, but as much as you want to share with my audience, that's fine.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I mean, I do a lot of different things at Brave. Basically, at Brave we do a mix of trying to get business to work with privacy, because we're kind of having this approach of being a user first company. And so a lot of work around getting partners motivated to work with us on some of the solutions that we have that might be a little different, bringing proofs of concept to market, as turning them into MVPs, and then kind of scaling those into dollars and lots of use. And then I also work on our token community too. So we launched a basic attention token in 2017, and I oversee the community over there. I have to work on the white paper for that, but it's part of kind of the system that we have at Brave where users can actually earn with their attention. So a lot of different hats, but I've been at Brave for a long time, and that's kind of how it goes. So it's all kind of the same mission overall to kind of really try to transform the web back for users.
It looks like you've got lots of plates spinning at once then, by the sounds of things. You've got lots going on.
Yes, exactly. That's well put.
So you joined Brave when, in 2016, is that right?
Yeah, so I started working with them in March of 2016, which was very early because the first blog post they posted was in January, and they were something different. I mean, I had been working in ad tech for almost a decade prior, and I was working for a company that was kind of like an agency, but we dealt with all of the ad product side of things. So we would work either with Google or the other big ad tech companies, and then we would work with the big media companies, and basically kind of none of the devs wanted to actually work on the ad tech. They wanted to work on developing their software. So we would get in there and get everything operational and all the products hooked up, and then also we specialized in looking for different ways to generate revenue for the customers, and whether that's Google or the media companies. And by media companies, I mean like Comcast and NFL, PGA, all these big, pretty much everybody that's big, we were working with them. So it was in the middle of kind of the sausage making of ad tech, and at a time when Google and Facebook were really starting to take a lot of the market out as programmatic advertising got really big, which ended up being kind of the wholesale slaughter of user privacy on the internet.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's a tricky thing because people are really not aware of the degree to which their information's used and collected. I was in the space, working on the tech, and I couldn't tell you where people's data ended up going because it was such a kind of free for all. And so the thing that was great about Brave was it was the first thing I saw after being in it for too long and kind of feeling not great at all about what we were doing, and contributing to the problems with privacy that were happening. But the problem was there was no one saying, hey, here's an alternative. Here's a new path that is sustainable for funding the web. And so I saw Brave, and that was kind of the first time I had seen something where, okay, and I'd done startups before, and I didn't want to put my wife through going through another startup again after crashing and burning a few of them on my own. And I always told myself it's got to be a team. They've got to have, good funding, and they've all got to be as kind of crazy as I am about this stuff. And Brave checked all those boxes, and it was the first time I really saw not just a company that wanted to like make privacy and business work, but also one that really wanted to think about the user differently. And that's like something that's even more true today than it was when we started. And so that's kind of was a big motivator for me. And it was like a really huge risk too, because if you think back to 2016, there was no GDPR back
No, of
then.
course.
Like, yeah, privacy was very back burner. And, my old colleagues in ad tech kind of looked at me sideways when I said, we're going to go try to make, privacy and advertising kind of work together. And so, but it was early days. I mean, when I joined, I think I was maybe like the 10th or 11th full-time person
Wow.
to come on, and we were out of a small WeWork in San Francisco, and it was very, very, very early days. But the odds were just really against us too. But it was a good group of people that most of them are still there, and I think the thing that we all saw, coming from different walks of life, and all people that came from big tech or tangential to that, like adjacent or whatever, is that at the time it was early in some ways, but it was also really late in others. And it was kind of like you see the point of no return. And if we really want to have a second chance to get the internet right for users, like this is it. Because these companies, I mean, back then, Google and Facebook and all of these big tech companies were huge, but they're nothing like they are now. And if we don't bring something new to market now, the whole idea that the user's agent is theirs is like going to be completely gone and hopeless. So yeah, that's kind of what got me to Brave. A lot of it was in seeing Brendan Eich, who's our co-founder and obviously created JavaScript, and Yan Zhu too. She's our chief infosec officer. I actually found Brave because of her, because I was looking at a tour and secured her up a bunch of other things, and I saw that she was at Brave, and it kind of turned me on to the whole thing.
So this is more than just a professional move for you then. There's something that's really quite personal in all of this, I'm sensing.
Extremely, like, and I've never put anything into this and myself in anything as much as I have with Brave. I think it's something where, I mean, being on the other side of it, and just, you're getting contracts to help find new ways to extract people's data from the device that are kind of out there, and aren't documented, and you're getting rewarded for that. And that felt really gross. But like the other thing that just sucked it from, I don't know, like I'm not an engineer, but from kind of a performance thing is you see the tech keep getting better, but everything kept getting slower and worse. Like it was like there was like this permanent regression happening with, how things actually worked, when all of the hardware and the tech should have been getting better. And so, it had to stop. And I think the other thing for me that was really like a pivotal moment in me wanting to change gears was like, you had these Snowden revelations, right? Where it really was like, and I was like, oh shit, this is really going to blow the lid off of things. And then I ended up working directly in this space where business intelligence starts to spring up after that. And you start to have this idea of all these media companies having data warehouses and us helping to facilitate that. And now the government doesn't have to do this shady behind the scenes stuff. They can just go buy the data, or they can just request it. And so it became kind of gross when you see what Snowden did by sticking his neck out there, and then the revelations themselves were damning enough. But then you see that it's almost like the system doubled down on collecting more data, and then seeing how some of that was used. It was just a big wake up call for me personally. And yeah, I'm in this. I think I've made myself pretty unemployable across big tech at this point. But that's kind of how far in you have to go.
But it's interesting. So just taking a few steps back, because you mentioned when you joined. In 2016, that was actually the year, well, a number of things happened with me. I moved to the US from the UK, was number one. But then I had a conversation with my neighbor, and this was in my first week of being here. And I said, this is crazy, it's public data everywhere. We're having this conversation. He said, but Ray, your data's public anyway. And I thought, huh, that's strange. Coming from Europe, what an attitude. It's just public anyway, just give up. So just before we get into, I've got so many questions, but so just while we're still on the personal side of things, what's your take on privacy in your personal life? Do you implement any personal privacy measures? I must admit, I do annoy my wife and kids with some of the techniques I implement, but how far do you go personally with this?
I go pretty far. There's some things where like I always try to, I was always a kid that kind of opened the box and actually read the directions on things when I bought them. And I kind of like to configure stuff. And so I'm pretty locked down at home. There's some things that I kind of leak. And one of the things about kind of the role I'm in now, I engage with the public a lot on X and elsewhere. And so there's stuff I'm like knowingly kind of leak here and there, but my home traffic I try to lock down, with VPN and things like that, or other measures. And with my kids, I've got 2 kids, young kids, and a lot of the stuff is pretty terrifying out there. So like we're pretty militant with them about like screen time and things like that, and making sure that the devices that they have access to are pretty locked down. But the way I approach it is, I've got window shades on my house. I'm going to have privacy protection on my devices. And there's a lot of just practical measures you can do too. I mean, like one of the things about the browser, and one of the things we've been trying to do is build the browser so that you can kind of replace a lot of the apps that you have on your phone, because like from my past life in the ad tech, like people really don't understand how ingrained in the framework of a device an app is compared to the web. And so like just removing some of those things, like not only does the device perform better, but you end up leaking a lot less data to these companies too. And so, I do take I'm not like I don't have like graphene on my phone, and I'm not like that locked down. I have devices that are, if I ever want to use them for certain things, but generally I'm more protective than most. But certainly kind of with some exceptions for some of the work I do.
You sound like me. Honestly, the purpose of this podcast is not to be on the extreme end of things. So life is impractical. And I tell you something, I got 2 teenagers now, and it just gets worse. It's a nightmare.
I can imagine, man. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. Like as some of the just. But you see it too. I think when you're around other parents and kids where they're way lax on that stuff, and you're like, "Good Lord, these are little monsters," But I can imagine, the teenager. I've got lots of things to look forward to. Right.
So, my take on ads has always been, and you may love or hate this comment, I don't know, but I've always wanted just to avoid ads. I just assume they've got malware in them, and I know they don't all have that, and I'm sure it's got a lot better. But you've heard stories that threat actors can inject malware into ads to compromise systems. So I am one of those that blocks all ads. So tell me where things are now, because I must admit, when I use my browser, because I block ads, it's when I see someone using it. I've seen it recently, actually. I was in a coffee shop and someone's laptop was open and they're browsing something and there's ads all over the screen. I thought, whoa, I've not seen that for a long time. So now we've got the ability to have privacy respecting ads. Tell us about that. How would you pitch that to someone like me that just thinks ads are evil, end of?
Yeah, no, I think first off, I mean, for the first part you mentioned, it is totally reasonable, and I don't think it's I think it's totally reasonable to have that position on advertising, because it's a lot less locked down than people realize it is. And like I said before, the data, where it's going for a certain party, but how that's used beyond that party, it can go on forever. And it is it is just a trash fire. I hate to say it, but I mean, I don't hate to say it. I like to say it. It's a trash fire of an industry, right? Like that's like basically kind of gotten away with theft for decades, and has the unfortunate part is that the browsers tried to do a bunch of things around changing the advertising model to work in a more privacy preserving way. Google tried this with Flock. Other entities are trying to do it. And the problem with that is that they just end up putting lipstick on a pig, because they're bound to the entire ad tech ecosystem that they've been touting to their shareholders as the great thing that's bringing them all this money for all these years.
Yeah.
And so they're in a really bad position where they can't be too negative about the industry, despite what they've been doing. And at the same time, they can't innovate past it because it's such a huge it's a small tent and a huge tent in itself, because there's so much useless stuff in there that have codependencies and all this stuff that, like, what you really need to do is kind of what Brave has done and others have done, where you have to really, it's like creative destruction, right? Like, if you're really going to put the user first, you have to eliminate the third party risk to the user that their browser is currently compromising them with, because that browser is the user's agent. It's technically called the user agent, right? But if you think about Chrome or any other browser that doesn't have privacy protection, they are very much not the user's agent anymore. They are the company's agent that is facilitating a task for a user. And they are compromising the user on every page they go on and across all of their devices, whether the user knows it or not. And it's a very freaky, because not only do they do this on the individual browser instance you're on, but if you have things synced across devices, they're there. And not only that, like, the thing that really became eye-opening for me was the fact that, like, okay, Edge is using Chromium as their browser, which is cool,
Yeah.
but then they also, like, they have you authenticate at the operating system and then pass that through to the browser, which then passes that through to iCloud, which is just like your whole life now is just like in their system, right? And so I think that the state of ad tech is garbage. It needs more folks like Brave doing what we're doing. It can't get off its own crack. It's like really bad.
Yeah.
I'm saying this like very loosely on purpose, because we were waiting for years, watching Google say we're going to pull Chrome's third-party cookies, get ready for it, at the same time that they're also doing things like making ad blocking less effective because of these declarative APIs for extensions and things like that that limit how effective you can, block trackers and ads and make these lists smaller, etc. It is like a death by a thousand paper cuts approach while they're saying that they care, which is like really despicable. But I think, like, you've got to have a new toolkit if you're going to approach this in a genuine way. And that's what separated us from the pack, was that we came in early. We said, okay, the browser is going to be the user agent again. It's going to be user first. That means we're going to protect the user's privacy by default. That means we're going to make it as secure as possible. And we're not going to make a decision that isn't making made on the benefit of the user, or, that's going to be hostile to the user in any way. And even like now, especially, but in the early days, it was less formulated. But we have security, privacy, and policy reviews on any net new code we put in the browser that's like for features or partnerships or across the whole stack. Like, the team has to like look at everything from policies to like, code implementations and all that stuff. And we're still going to miss things because it's software development, but like, that's how militant we kind of take it. And then once you have that set, like, how can you get to the roots of the issues, right? Like, parts of advertising have worked because it has basically made, the web, like, not free, but like, accessible for people, without having to paywall everything. Ads can be helpful. They can be useful if they're done the right way. And our whole approach has been like, look, like, let the user have choice, whether that's like, if they want something that's like targeted locally from their browser, they can opt into that. If they want to turn off a digital billboard on a new tab page, they can do that too. Like, give them the power to control the experience. But what is the root of the tracking problem? And it really comes down to two things. It's targeting and it is accounting. And those are solvable problems. Like, we can figure out how to measure if an ad has been viewed and do it in a way that uses zero knowledge proofs or confirmation events and reporting, because marketers aren't looking at my or your individual data. They're looking at data in aggregate. So if we from the browser can use the browser as a local tool and match things based on what you're actually doing in your browser without leaking your information anywhere, then we have a better tool for the job. And if we can have a blinded system that can account for events without linking them to an individual user, and then give a marketer proof that they're getting ROI on what they're doing, then we have a way that we can monetize using advertising that doesn't compromise the users. And so that's kind of what we did. And at the same time too, we tried to kind of make it so that users that want to contribute to creators and publishers can do that too, and basically like try to start from there and say, look, like we can have models that work with accounting and business and allow the web to be monetized and give users control and choice, and people will move with their feet to that. And that was kind of the theory when we started. And we're at 80 million users now monthly and growing. And we have a search engine which we didn't have in the beginning. It's a private search engine too that's to like 1 billion queries a month. It's people are moving with their feet to this because it's not just about privacy. Like, you get a lot of other benefits as a user, better performance, cleaner web, all these good things that kind of come with having better privacy protection.
Well, you actually touched on something earlier about ads getting blocked. A story I want to share, YouTube, there's a lot, if you look on Reddit, there's conversation about how do we block ads now? It doesn't work anymore. Twitch did something, I don't know what they did, but uBlock Origin doesn't work. So people are trying to find ways around it. So surely, there's this battle going on with the end user, whether it's for privacy or just the fact they don't want to see the ads, I don't know. But surely what you're doing then is attractive to the business side of things, because now it's not a case of people blocking ads because of privacy issues. They've got a way of seeing the ads. And then on the creator side, and it was interesting actually, just today I saw a creator video. She's a musician, massive following, and she released an album. I'll put the link in the show notes because I can't remember the name of it, but she released an album anonymously to see how, without advertising, without any social media backing, as a brand new artist with this brand new name, how much reach can I get? She got 11 likes on this YouTube video. That was it, after so much effort. So people do need ads. Creators need ads, whether it's musicians or large corporations. But there's this fight, isn't there, of blockers and people trying to work around it. So surely do you see this as a good, let's meet in the middle here? You've got the privacy respecting side of it. So someone like me is going to think, okay, I'm not going to have all my, I'm not going to be tracked. And next time I go to a store and put my rewards number in, that's all linked to it. There's some horror stories out there. I'm sure you can share some of those as well. But is this a good middle ground? Is that how, am I understanding this correctly?
It's basically trying to create that middle ground, right? Where, and we have cohorts of users that, and one of the things that we wanted to do, because we're not a nonprofit, right? Like we are like, we want to generate revenue. Sure. And for us though, how do you balance that against, with these kind of user first principles, right? And so for us, it's been like, well, you got to diversify, right? So like we have an ads track for folks that want to help us monetize via advertising. And sometimes, people are all over the spectrum with this stuff. Some people are like, I think the thing that people don't understand is like how horrible the advertising situation is on kind of the unprotected web, because like people don't even realize that some things in Brave are even ads because they're so used to just so much more noise in front of their face all the time. And so like out of the gate, it's pretty minimal, but we want to have a route where users can, support us through either the advertising route. We have premium products that we brought to market, like VPN and premium search, and Leo, our AI assistant in the browser. You can get a premium version of that. So like kind of these premium options. And then we even have just a route where people can support us through, paying for just give them a route. If they want to pay to support, great. If they want a completely free ride, cool, whatever. Like there's going to be cohorts that want to do each one of those things. And what you notice is the majority, either, especially at the stage we're at, like wants to support us. And not only that, but they kind of like what we see is there's like a genuine curiosity for the companies that are advertising in this model because they want to get to our user base. There's a user base there that they can reach that are not going to get reached otherwise. And so it creates an interesting opportunity for marketers because they can come and see, and it's a tech forward audience. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of creating a middle ground.
Absolutely, but
showing people that it's actually like a market that has demand, because that's when we started Brave. That was a question. Like what you had, the second best thing you had out there when I joined Brave were things that were trying to kind of evade ad blockers to let publishers still get pennies by showing you just even worse ads. And so getting a better toolkit out there has been important to monetize things. And yeah, and what we found is a mix of things. Like people are genuinely, they want to support the cause basically, but also like they want to see what brands are working with us, like whether even if they're just buying advertising. And then if we have our own products too, they'll give us. But one of the things that's really great about what we do is we don't do the tracking that companies typically do to see how users are behaving. Like we have ways of, that are privacy preserving of like product diagnostics and things like that are kind of statistical, and they're not like very precise, but can give us enough information to know if something's working or not. But like we have to talk to our users a lot, and our users want to talk to us a lot. And like whether it's myself or like I'm a VP in the company, our CEO Brendan Ike is on X all day, like talking to users. Like we're all just out there. Like a lot of us are out there engaging with users all the time, throwing stuff to GitHub, bringing other team members in. Like it's a big part of what we're trying to do, and growing the kind of community that way is like super important.
Well, I'm sure the community is very vocal as well if something doesn't go their way.
Extremely vocal. I love it though. I think it's really cool way of approaching things, because so much of the world is not like that. Like they'll like if you look at like what Microsoft or Google have done, they basically kind of created these like air quote communities where they'll throw issues into a forum and kind of leave them go, but getting a hold of a real person. And this is funny because like even when we were licensing stuff for Google and when we were working with Google on behalf of clients, like nobody has a phone number over there. Like you're just emailing with people. Like getting in touch with a real person is just very difficult, even if you're in the mix with them. Like, so I think if we can be very personable with our users, like we're going to know what they want, what they like, what they don't like, what we can get away with. And there are different groups of our user base that I know I can go pull on something and get an answer that's going to be it'll be anecdotal, but pretty true to form on different areas. And so I think it's a pretty healthy part of building a product is to have that real tight connection with the user base.
Absolutely. In fact, I heard a great analogy the other day. Someone was talking about this mum and pop shop. Amazing reviews online. Everyone loved them. They were very personal. They'd been there for years. People, they knew their customers' names, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger. Next thing you know, they opened up a few more. It got so big they couldn't have that personal touch anymore with their community, their customers, and it was that they just lost credibility. Reviews went downhill, and we see that all the time. So it's great that you've still got that connection with the community, because as I say, that it's very vocal, but that's good and a bad thing, I guess.
It is, but you kind of get used to it too, and that like there's also a balance too, because like we get questions from people where it's like, you guys want to go after, like they'll look at like a near peer competitor, right? Like a Firefox or Opera or whatever, and I'm like, look, like if we can get their users, fantastic. But like what I really care about is making something that's like as private as possible, like with parity to something like what a uBlock Origin user would expect on that side of the spectrum. But that's also usable as Chrome, right? Because from my point of view, the addressable and Brendan Ike, our CEOs as well, like the addressable user base is like 3.45 billion, Chrome users that are just waiting for something better and don't know it yet, like because it just keeps getting worse and worse. And so like one thing I would tell people is like, go try us for a week and then go back to Chrome. And
they won't like that when they go back.
It's just so messy. Like go to a recipe site, or like my wife was looking at stuff to like redecorate, and these sites are just so riddled. It's just, you can't even find what you're trying to find on the page. It's just really
It's
gnarly.
nuts. It really is. And so some of my listeners are fairly new to privacy. So let's say whatever browser they're moving from, they install Brave, they're looking at it for the first time, and you've mentioned some stuff already. In fact, I've got it open now. There's Brave Rewards, you've got VPN, there's various integrations, there's Leo with AI. Could you do a brief overview of, what are these new things they haven't seen before, so it doesn't freak them out and they think, oh, what's this? they start getting scared.
So the rewards piece is the one where you can opt in, and you'll see private ads that we run in our system that are privacy preserving, and you can even go further if you want and earn basic attention tokens, which is our cryptocurrency that we have in the browser from viewing ads, and we give a percentage of the revenue share. 70% of the revenue share from paid campaigns that we have goes back to the user just for viewing or viewing the ads, like, because that intention is important. But some people don't want that, right? Like but it was just kind of our way of like showing, okay, it's the attention economy. Users need to get a share of that. And then we also have Leo, like you mentioned, which is our AI browser assistant, which is really cool because it's, AI is kind of just proliferated like crazy, but nobody was really thinking about it from the privacy side. So like we approached it the way we always approach stuff, where we're like, look, like how can we do this where it limits, it collects as little to no information as possible, or even processes very minimally, but gives you a really good agent in the browser, not just for like chat bot stuff, but also like the browser, you're doing everything in it, right? So like you could think about going to YouTube and like asking, Leo to summarize the video that you're going to watch, or a developer can open up developer tools and like have Leo basically like assist them with a coding problem or whatever. Like you could, all these different ways that you can do it. We actually have we have a video conferencing tool for just launching video calls from the browser called Brave Talk, where you can do end-to-end encryption on it. But we integrated Leo there too, so it can transcribe your video sessions privately and give you a printout of it like when you're done. And so lots of different ways that we're starting to look at how can AI make the browsing experience better, whether that's like reorganizing tabs for you. These are things we're thinking about, like, and have teams like doing hack sessions with, but also like, still not be too hype driven, right? Like you have something real that's like helpful. And so that's one part of it. We also have, I think users will find the first time they enter something on the keyboard in the URL bar, we acquired a search engine called Tailcat from a browser company called Clicks a few years ago, and they had been building their own index like privately from a private browser that was based in Europe, and we brought them into Brave. We made it Brave Search, and then we started really working on that too to make it competitive with Google, and it's a totally independent search index. So that means, like if you look at like DuckDuckGo and other search engines are basically syndicated, and they have privacy treatment on them, but it's basically like a more private version of Bing, right? Or Google.
You're seeing those results.
Exactly. And then they are also like, they fall prey to decisions that Microsoft makes upstream that are out of their control, right? If they decide to censor certain things or whatever. Well, with ours, we have an actual independent index, which is like extremely hard to do. And luckily we found the team that we found. But it makes a huge difference because if you think the advertising world is kind of a small tent, the search engine world's even smaller. Like I think it's Google, Bing, and then us on the independent side, at least on the West. And then you've got, all these other search engines that are on top of those things. And so it's been a really big thing for us where we've added AI answers to it too. So about like 30 to 40% of the search queries that go out actually can get like a source cited AI response that actually looks really nice. Or you can force it to do it as well. But like trying to improve that search experience and not have it be like horrible, like with some of the Google Gemini things that are telling people to like put screws on pizza and stuff.
I've seen some worse comments from Gemini. Yeah.
and so like, yeah, I mean, and it's one of those things too, where you're onto something when people are saying, dang, this is really good. And we're not having to mention privacy at all, because I think like if we're offering good, strong privacy tools, you shouldn't have to mention it. It should just work, right? Like, and it should be expected. And that's always the kind of trade-off that you're trying to not have to make trade-offs on, but to make a better product for, is like, how can you have parity with convenience, right? Where I'm in a world where we can go to Whole Foods and pay with your palm at the cash register. Like, can we do that privately eventually, right? Like, that's the kind of headspace you got to have if you want to scale.
One of the things I was going to ask you about, you mentioned Leo AI. Am I right in thinking, and I may be misspeaking here, but can I use locally hosted LLMs on my machine?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing we came to market with a little while ago is a new feature in Leo that lets you bring your own model. And so we started with that with large language models that you could bring, because a lot of our users are developers, and they're people that are kind of on the leading edge of this stuff. And also, like, our team is basically trying to get the local model piece down as well, because we want to be able to leverage the local data on the browser in these things as well. So I think we're moving in that direction, to where you could bring your own local model. You can use local models in your house, those types of things that you can connect to. That's kind of, I think, more the end game, is that like you can really have that selection and choice as a user to like add in local models that are safe for you, or use any of the LLMs. Like, we have people using Grok in Leo, and doing a whole bunch of other things too, that are out there.
That's interesting, because I'm going to bring the nerd out in me now. But growing up, I used to watch Star Trek Next Generation, and they could talk to the computer. But little did I know at that time that when that happens in the future, where we are now, that's all in the cloud. And I don't know what, and I haven't really spoken about this on my podcast much, but I don't know what is shared when using all the popular LLMs out there, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, all those out there. So I have been experimenting with locally hosted models as well. And I guess the utopia that I'd be looking for, and it'd be interesting if this is aligned with where your vision is, I would love an assistant that can actually look at my calendars and remind me of what's happening and read my emails, but have it all locally hosted. And that's not, I don't think it's possible today, but is that where you see things going?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Brave team is looking at it like kind of that Jarvis, right? Like assistant type of a thing where, and I think that is kind of like the utopia, right? Like, and like you mentioned, some of this is not yet doable. Like, some of it is like, the compute power is not there yet, or it's not been tuned enough there. But these are all temporary problems, right? Like, if you look at the amount of investment that's gone into NVIDIA, right, and these entities, and the interest around it, like, you're not slowing down. I have a podcast I host called The Brave Technologist, which people can check out on brave.com/podcast if they want.
I'll stick a link in the show notes as well.
Shameless plug in there. But one of the things, I started it about a year ago, and we have people on from the AI side, like a lot of episodes on AI, right? Like, we've had like policymakers, and we've had academics. We've had people in academics as far as like building models and doing benchmarking, everything, right? Like, and then people that are working in the space. And one of those things that when I asked them, like, okay, we know what the dystopian the fear is around kind of Terminator-ish things, and all the ways it could go haywire, but like, what are the actual practical concerns you have with this technology? And the majority of people give me two answers to that. And they say, one, the privacy element is one that people are very concerned about, because you're seeing how kind of these things could be implemented on devices that are listening all the time and doing all sorts of weird things. The other thing is accessibility is like a huge concern. It's one of the biggest concerns that I hear across the board, whether people are like, academics or in the industry, because a lot of nation states are trying to navigate how they approach regulation, if they regulate, how they do it, all of that. The biggest resounding answer I get from people is like, the folks that keep this technology from the people in their country are going to be a generation behind, like if they don't get people onto this, because that's the rate at which this is improving and iterating and basically like being productive with the economy, right? And so that's serious. And so I think that it's a matter of time before these local models become a thing, but that's kind of what you want, right? Like you want to have something that can be helpful locally, that isn't going to leak your info, but more importantly, like what you're thinking and what you want. Like that's important information that people want, but like people will need to get more protective of that too. And these are the things we're kind of thinking about too when we're approaching this, is like, how can you kind of, in that vein of making sure that it's not back to an individual user, and making sure that your own, presence online isn't getting to companies you've never heard of before to do whatever the heck they're going to do with it.
Well, it's interesting because how you started the beginning of this podcast, you were talking about how the ad scene was back in the day, how bad it was, and what drove you to join Brave originally. We're kind of at the similar beginnings in AI, and I guess it's great that you're looking at that now, early, rather than say in another 8 years when it is too late.
There's another prong of it too. I mean, I think the AI part is really important. The other part that's becoming increasingly important is around we're moving toward a cashless society in a lot of ways. Like in the States, it's very much like this. Like more and more places you go to, they're saying this is cashless for a bunch of reasons, right? Like, but if we're going to that space, people need to be able to have some parity to privately transacting, in the digital world. And that's an area where I feel like even more than AI, people are almost willing to give up privacy on. And it's one where I see the mistakes that people had in this space around the proliferation of like really user hostile technology on the stuff you browse is going to happen on the payment side, unless there's more of a concerted effort to have private transactions become, table stakes. We're working on that right now with Zuko Wilcox from Zcash. We've integrated them into a wallet in the browser, and they have shielded Zcash like private transactions. And we're trying a bunch of different things out with that, where we can like give users like a private way to transact, and the utopia there is kind of like, look, whether you're transacting in cash or crypto or whatever, there's a path where you can route to private transactions from Brave. Like that would be kind of like the end game, and doing that in a way that's like decentralized enough to where governments can't hold it over your head and try and regulate the tools that you're putting into the market, which is a challenge because right now developers are kind of getting locked up over these things. And so that's the area too. I think that it's really going to get hotter this year, especially after this election, where now people are like, okay, crypto's not going away. And a lot of the people that were pushing for that are now turning inward and saying, okay, these are the things we're willing to give up. And the more cypherpunk side of the space is like, well, no, we're not going to give up private transactions because those are, privacy is freedom, and that's what we're doing, right? Like, so like, that's the next forefront I see, like, because if you can't freely transact, that is like a huge impediment, and things get pretty dark pretty fast.
Well, it's interesting because one of my kids does piano lessons, and the piano teacher said, "Oh yeah, pay me on Venmo." And I'm like, no, not happening. So my wife's saying, well, what do we need to pay this lady? And I've had it before, whether it's, we had some yard work done a while ago. It was a one-off thing, and they only took Venmo. And I refuse to use anything like that. It's just a disaster. I won't go into that now. But there has to be another way. And it's funny, I actually turned up at a car wash the other day. I was traveling, so I was not in a place I'm familiar with. I was actually shocked to see it only took coins.
Right.
I was like, have I just gone back into the 1980s here? This is insane. There was no card or anything. But you're right. I want an alternative, but I can't say to the piano teacher, Bitcoin, can I just send you some Bitcoin? They don't, that's not their world. So we do need something that's easier access.
And there's like there's these things called the stable coins that have become, it's actually one of those things in crypto that's finding product market fit. But people kind of get nervous about things called the central bank digital currencies like CBDCs, where it is kind of the dystopian end game where everything is tracked by the bank, and they can turn on and off your money, that kind of thing. There's a real threat of even stable coins becoming like that. And so there's a challenge there in the space where, okay, like these stable coins give you something great because you can peg it to an actual, national currency denomination, right? So if I'm holding crypto, I can convert it into something that acts just like a dollar. But like without a way to do that privately, you're the benefit. The funny thing is it's like a total catch, because the public blockchains give you this beautiful transparency that had we had that in 2005-6, it would have probably averted an entire global financial crisis, because none of the shady stuff that the banks were doing would have been visible. I mean, it all would have been out there. People would have been looking at the networks and saying, oh gosh, here comes the train, let's get out of the way. But the flip side of that is that if you don't have a way to privately transact in a system like that, you're basically giving out more of your information to the world. And the thing that people really don't think about is the fact that if you're using this like legacy tracking on websites, you can link that to blockchain activity pretty easily. Like it's not, more of your life is just going to become tracked and profiled without you even knowing it. So it is a set of challenges that we're in now, where it's not only around this whole browsing side, but then you throw in this transactional side too. And there's pros and cons, and access to financial markets, all these things that you outside of the US and other parts of the world, it's very hard for people to get access to these things. Things that crypto can open that up. But on the other end of it, like we got to make sure that the folks that are building the software are mindful of these concerns. And that's one of the reasons why I also do the podcast, is just to kind of have people on to talk about these things, because I feel like once people are aware, then you have to make a choice whether you're going to, go in one direction or another. But right now, the awareness level is so low, and these market, if I thought that ad tech was moved fast and scaled fast, like crypto's like light speed ahead. Like time just moves differently there.
Yeah.
Like, your 1 year is like a quarter of a year is like an entire year, like in everywhere else, like in that space. So like, yeah, it's an area where Brave's kind of trying to also differentiate from everybody else.
And this is, so am I right in thinking this is really revolves around Web3? And can you just tell us what that is and what that means in terms of blockchain and decentralization?
Yeah, I mean, like if you think about it, Google and a small set of companies really own a lot of the infrastructure for the web and how that works. And the idea with Web3 is that if you can decentralize a lot of these different services, whether it's file storage for hosting websites or transactions that are, done on a global network in a peer-to-peer way, or even with entities that are transacting on a global network, you can avoid the situation of somebody trying to deplatform you, because if they try to remove one peer, they have to remove everything else, right? And so whether it's financial transactions or other web services, this blockchain space is giving people the ability to kind of own the content they put in the world, have it better distributed. There was an example with, I think the Turkish government was trying to take down Wikipedia in Turkey, and this IPFS protocol that does file storage in a decentralized way backed up Wikipedia in Turkey so that people could actually access it when the government was trying to censor it. So there's ways that like this technology can do things, but even more practically, right? Like things like a bank transfer. If you go and do a bank transfer, before it goes from A to B, it hits like a dozen or more banks in between. And it's a really junky process that takes a while. And surprisingly, a lot of the time, the money doesn't even show up on the other end. A blockchain can actually like get that finality, on a secure network that's globally distributed in a matter of seconds or minutes, and do it in a way that gives you that finality that you need, and has a record of it. So like, there's a lot of problems that it solves as like a way to upgrade things, but there's also a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of like, especially right now, like in this last election season, there was a ton of them. But after like all this stuff with FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried and things like that fell apart, you had politicians that are being politicians and kind of using it as a football, and trying to say, well, this is only good for crime. And it's like really stupid, because cash, first of all, like U.S. dollar is the best thing to use for crime, period. Like,
Exactly.
if I'm a criminal, like the last thing I want to do is have a trace of the crime somewhere that everybody can look at. And one thing that's been really great about this space is that it's kind of like in ad blocking, you have these like guardian angels that are like these filter list maintainers that are always updating. They don't get paid. They just update these filter lists in the community to make sure that things get blocked. Well, in the blockchain world, there are these chain sleuths that like investigate the blockchain activity all the time. Like, and they basically, like, if they see something that smells weird, they go to Twitter or whatever and just start talking about it. And then you've got like millions of eyes on something right away, where like, oh, there's a bad actor. And then they can try and figure out, oh, well, avoid this or whatever. And it's really kind of cool that way. But like, if you're a criminal, that's not great, like to have like a million deputies out there that are now looking at the bad activity that you're doing. So a lot of this is easy. Like, I feel like these politicians made a big miscalculation when trying to right size this and present it as an issue, because it's more than just a way to transfer money. It's a technology, and the people that are in this space are just absolutely, they have a level of conviction that is unseen. Like, if you can survive like 90% of your net worth going down when the market gets volatile and still care enough about it to put your life into it, then Congress isn't really going to get in your way. Like, you're going to keep building what you're building, because, I mean, if you look at the timeline, all of this technology kind of came out of the financial crisis. Like, Bitcoin was created in 2009, right? So like, it came right out of that global financial crisis. And I've been in this space since 2014, 2015. And a lot of the people that were early in this space were people that were formerly in fintech, that were working for these banks, that are like, how this is not where we need to do something different now. Like, we need a new system, right? So the fact that it's gotten to where it's gotten is a bit of a miracle in itself. But the fact that it came out of this last season, where you've got the biggest government, most powerful government in the world trying to basically, get rid of it, and they can't get rid of it. Like, that's something that's not going away anytime soon. So I think the challenge now is to like look at these more finer grained problems and really make it so that it's safe for people to use as far as privacy goes, and then just show more use cases that are useful and functional for people. And I think that people will come around. And I think that it's one of those things where it's on the developers to demystify it a lot. Like, right now, it kind of lives in a separate wallet. It is kind of, people look at it like magic beans or whatever. But the more that we can move it close to actual payment methods that you save in your wallet, like, the more that it's just another thing that you can, it's just like cash or card or debit or whatever. Like, it's just another thing that's there for you to use. So that's kind of the end game there, is to just kind of demystify it and then make it so that people don't have to worry about whether something is using a blockchain or not, that they're just using something that's better. That's kind of the goal.
Yeah, exactly. But it's interesting you mentioned you demystify it, because honestly, my view is that a lot of these politicians, they can probably operate their iPhone and that's about it. They just do not understand it. And it's like saying, the roads are used for human trafficking, so let's just close all the roads down. Well, it's just ridiculous.
Exactly.
It's the same same notion.
There's that part, and the other flip side of that is that the developers in this space that also are a lot of the advocacy and like a lot of the agenda are people that really love overly complicated things and have a really hard time of breaking them down for everyday people to just use and understand. So it's kind of a mix, and that's another reason what a lot of what we try to do at Brave is to make it so that it's easy. Like, right now, you can go enable Brave rewards on your browser and start earning cryptocurrency in your browser without having to know what a blockchain is. Like, my neighbor can go earn crypto in Brave, and they know, oh, well, okay, I use a browser, I get I get something. I get that. I don't get what all these other things do, right?
Yeah.
So like we have to get more of the other things understood. But that's our problem. That's not the greater public's problem at all.
I will let the piano teacher know, that's for sure. Honestly, we could talk for hours. This is really interesting. Anything, before we wrap up, anything else you want to share with my listeners, and anything you want in terms of links? I can put those in the show notes as well, so that's not a problem.
Honestly, if you haven't tried out Brave, give us a shot. It's brave.com. Or if you want to get your feet wet, you could try our search engine. It's search.brave.com. And I host a podcast called The Brave Technologist. We put out episodes every week. You just go to brave.com/podcast for that. And I'm just Luke Mulks on X or Twitter, whatever we're calling it. My DMs are open. I'd love to hear from anybody that has questions or has something that they've run into issues with or has questions about anything. Like doors open.
That's great. Listen, Luke, this has been really eye-opening for me, and I'm sure my listeners as well. So thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, man. This has been great. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with Luke. I hope you did as well. And I'm convinced to use Brave a little more than I was. Now, I'll be honest, I was always using Brave in combination with Firefox, or obviously now LibreWolf, especially with LibreWolf, since it wouldn't always play nice with certain websites. But we do so much in the web browser. And I'd love to hear from you if you use Brave or do not, or you have another suggestion. I know a few of you have actually emailed me and talked about Mullvad browser and various other options out there. At the end of the day, I don't think we should overthink this. Sure, we use the browser for everything. Our email, our online banking, pretty much our whole digital life is done from the one app. And I just think making a conscious decision to be more private, whether that's with Brave or something else, then you're doing the right thing. Now, I'm going to be elusive. I'm going to disappear and live like a hermit for a few weeks. I may be back before the Christmas break, or I might wait until the new year. Either way, have a great Christmas. And while you're with friends and family, use it as an opportunity to review their security practices. Perhaps they're not using a password manager and you can introduce them to Bitwarden. Even better, you could introduce them to this podcast. Anyway, talk soon, and I've got some packing to do. Where's that episode on bug out bags?